In January 2024, the British Foreign Secretary stunned observers by announcing that the UK might be willing to recognise Palestinian statehood before a final negotiated agreement with Israel. This was followed by reports that the Biden administration was also exploring the implications of recognition. But while it's unclear whether either will go ahead with it, the mere suggestion that they're looking into recognition is seen as a hugely significant step. But what exactly would it mean for Palestine and the Palestinian people? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. For almost 80 years, the question of Palestinian statehood has been at the heart of tensions in the Middle East. It sparked numerous wars, led to untold deaths, seen millions displaced, and even fed broader geopolitical tensions. But while the principle of a two-state solution has long been accepted as the cornerstone of a final negotiated settlement between the Palestinians and the Israelis, the process of establishing a viable and functional state has receded ever further into the distance as talks have broken down and violence has flared. Against this backdrop, some countries that had previously stood firmly against the recognition of Palestinian statehood before a formal peace agreement now appear to be changing their positions. But would it be as significant as it seems? Palestine, also known to some countries as the State of Palestine, to others as the Occupied Palestinian Territories, and to some as just the Palestinian Territories, comprises the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Altogether, it amounts to around 6,200 square kilometres or 2,400 square miles. The West Bank, which includes East Jerusalem, is surrounded by Israel to the north, west and south, and Jordan to the east. The Gaza Strip borders Israel to the north and east, and Egypt to the south. To its west lies the Mediterranean Sea. The Palestinian population is estimated to be around 5 million. This includes around 3 million in the West Bank and 2 million in Gaza. The Arab Palestinians are predominantly Sunni Muslim, however, there's also a small Christian minority. Palestine has a complex and contentious history stretching back thousands of years. Having been inhabited by various ancient people, including the Canaanites and the Israelites, it was later conquered by various imperial powers, including the Romans, Byzantines, the Islamic Caliphates and the Crusaders. However, our story starts in the late 19th century when it was under Ottoman rule. With rising persecution in Europe, thousands of Jews made their way to Palestine as calls began to grow for the establishment of a Jewish homeland. Despite strong opposition from the local Arab population, this process accelerated after the territory came under British rule at the end of the First World War. All this would come to a head after the Second World War and the Holocaust. In 1947, the newly established United Nations proposed partitioning Palestine into separate independent Jewish and Arab Palestinian states. On the 14th of May 1948, Israel declared independence. But while the new Jewish state was immediately attacked by its Arab neighbours, it managed to beat back the invading forces. Having secured its statehood, Israel was formally admitted as the 59th member of the UN a year later, in May 1949. But while Israel had now confirmed its existence as a sovereign state, the Palestinians faced a very different outcome as the immediate hopes for independence disappeared. Having been forced out of large areas of land set aside for their state, they were left with 2 bits of territory, neither of which they controlled. While Gaza fell under Egyptian military administration, the West Bank was under Jordanian rule. In the years that followed, the Palestinians and their Arab allies continued to press for the destruction of Israel and the creation of an independent Palestine within the former colonial borders. Meanwhile, as numerous groups fought against Israel, a new umbrella body, the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, was established in June 1964 to coordinate Palestinian political and military activities. In 1967, a new Arab-Israeli war erupted. This time, Israeli forces seized control of Gaza and the West Bank. But while the UN Security Council called on Israel to withdraw from the territories that it had occupied, Israel remained put. Over the next several decades, the Palestinian campaign intensified. Under its charismatic chairman, Yasser Arafat, the PLO began to expand its armed activities, launching attacks against Israeli targets throughout the 1970s and 1980s. But while the PLO steadily came to be accepted as the primary representative of the Palestinian people, including by the UN General Assembly in 1974, the question of statehood remained open. That was until, on the 15th of November 1988, the PLO formally declared Palestinian independence. Although the PLO had no direct control over the territory of Palestine, which was still under Israeli military control, the Palestinian state was nevertheless recognised by scores of countries. This included most Arab and Muslim states, as well as many countries from the non-aligned movement and the communist Eastern Bloc. It was also admitted as a member state by the Arab League and the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, and the United Nations General Assembly acknowledged the Declaration of Independence. But although Palestinian statehood had been widely recognised, any hopes for creating an actual state on the ground still seemed distant. However, by the start of the 1990s, the situation was changing. As the Cold War ended, the PLO lost support of the Soviet Union. At the same time as a violent uprising broke out in the West Bank and Gaza, pressure grew on Israel to end the occupation. All this led to a breakthrough in 1993 when, following Norwegian-led talks, the PLO and Israel reached a historic peace deal. In return for accepting Israel's right to exist within the pre-1967 boundaries, the two sides explicitly envisaged the creation of a Palestinian state on the ground. In the meantime, a Palestinian Authority would be established to take interim control of the administration of the West Bank and Gaza. Despite hopes that this would finally pave the way for a formal Palestinian state, the talks became deadlocked. As a result, towards the end of the first decade of the millennium, the Palestinian leadership launched a new recognition campaign. But while 139 of the 193 members of the UN now accepted Palestinian statehood, at least on paper, many key states remained firmly opposed to recognition until an agreed settlement with Israel. While the most important of these was the United States, it also included most of the European Union, including the other permanent Security Council members, Britain and France. Nevertheless, having been admitted to the UN Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, by majority vote in 2011, Palestine formally applied for full UN membership. As expected, the application failed to secure the required recommendation from the Security Council needed to go for a final vote in the General Assembly. Despite this, a few months later, the General Assembly instead voted overwhelmingly to grant the State of Palestine the status of a non-member observer state at the UN. Crucially though, recognition continued to be opposed by the United States, Britain and France until a formal final agreement with Israel. However, the conflict in Gaza has seemingly focused attention on the status question. Amidst mounting concern at Israel's devastating war on Gaza, which has now claimed almost 30,000 lives, and with clear evidence that the Netanyahu administration has no intention of accepting a Palestinian state, it appears that recognition is being seriously considered by the three powers. This came to international attention in January 2024 when Lord Cameron, the British Foreign Secretary, surprised observers by suggesting that Britain may be willing to change its long-standing position and recognise a Palestinian state before a final deal had been agreed with Israel. Even more significantly, reports also emerged that the Biden administration was looking into the implications of recognition. Likewise, France has also signalled that it too could consider recognising Palestine before a final agreement with Israel. But just what exactly would recognition by these three countries mean for Palestine? Supporters of the idea point to various ways it could have a profound effect. For a start, securing British, French and US recognition would finally allow Palestine to join the United Nations as a full member. This would carry both symbolic and practical significance. At a political and diplomatic level, it would send a powerful signal that the international community has accepted Palestine. It would also allow Palestine to join the full range of UN organs and institutions, including the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. It would also give Palestine greater access to international legal institutions such as the International Criminal Court, the ICC, and the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. In addition, it would give the Palestinians an equal footing with other states on the world stage. With full international acceptance and UN membership, they would be far stronger in diplomatic negotiations with other countries. Likewise, supporters argue that it would enhance the Palestinian position in peace talks with Israel. A fully recognised sovereign Palestinian state that was also a UN member would signal a genuine global commitment to a two-state solution in real terms. Palestine would already have been accepted as a state. Therefore, the negotiations would instead focus on its future relationship with Israel. But while many would argue that Palestinian recognition and UN membership would be a game changer, many observers are less sure. While 140 countries have indeed recognised Palestine, one could argue that this is largely symbolic. It's about making a statement rather than recognising an actual state. Indeed, there are profound legal and political implications about recognising a country that one could argue doesn't meet the standard definition of statehood, let alone admitting it as a full UN member. Under the 1933 Montevideo Convention, which offers the most usually cited definition of a state, a country must have a settled population, a defined territory, effective governance, and the ability to enter relations with other states. But while Palestine certainly has a settled population and an ability to enter interstate relations, territory and governance pose potential problems. Although Palestine has a defined territory, the West Bank and Gaza, the Palestinian Authority controls a mere fraction of it. Of course, this isn't necessarily a bar to recognition. Bosnia didn't control all its claimed territory when it joined the UN in 1992. However, in the Palestinian case, Israel has now effectively annexed so much land it calls into question the viability of a Palestinian state. Indeed, this very issue has just gone before the International Court of Justice. Likewise, regarding governance, given that Israel effectively exercises such a hold over the day-to-day life of the territories, there are also real questions about the degree to which Palestine can be regarded as a fully independent entity. While observers point out that the Palestinian Authority has many of the trappings of statehood, Israel effectively controls finances and security, two essential government functions. For all these reasons, critics argue that recognising Palestine and admitting it to the UN under these current circumstances would be almost meaningless in real terms. Indeed, it would even undermine the concept of statehood. Then again, others argue that inaction merely allows Israel to make Palestinian statehood irrelevant, if not wholly unrealisable. And herein lies the real point. The formal recognition of Palestine statehood by Britain, France and the United States will only mean something if they also take steps to make an independent, sovereign and viable Palestinian state a meaningful reality on the ground. I hope you found that helpful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching and see you in the next video.